Welcome to Next Economy Now. I'm your host, Andrew Baskin. The goal of this interview series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, diverse, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good. In this episode of Next Economy Now, Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lyft Economy, interviews Jenn Pryce. Jenn Pryce is president and CEO of Calvert Foundation. Having worked at Calvert Foundation for nearly a decade, Jenn has shaped the strategic direction of the organization to lead on rising trends such as investing with a gender lens and making impact investing more accessible to retail investors. Ryan's conversation with Jenn takes us through an overview of the Calvert Foundation and their initiatives, including their Community Investment Note, Women Investing in Women, or Win-Win, the Raíces Investment Initiative, now known as Parte de la Solución, and capital aggregation. Ryan shares a personal testimonial about Calvert Foundation's Community Investment Note. They explore how Calvert Foundation measures impact and offer leadership advice and fundraising tips for savvy entrepreneurs in differentiating the variety of folks who refer to themselves as impact investors. Hint, look at where the capital is coming from and the typical investments that capital makes. Without further ado, please enjoy Ryan Honeyman's conversation with Jenn Pryce.
Jenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Jenn, tell us a little bit about your background. What were you doing before you got into the mission-aligned investing space?
So it could be a long answer, but I'll try to keep it short. I had a very diverse path that led me to the work I'm doing now. Some of it very traditional. I did spend about 10 years on Wall Street, so to speak, in a few different roles. One as an investment banker in London and another here in the U.S. doing equity research. But kind of the bookends of that experience was probably more formative for me. I graduated college and studied biomedical engineering in undergrad and felt like it was a great experience, but I had never really traveled. I had never seen a lot of the world and was very curious, and also saw an opportunity to give back. I had been really blessed with a lot up to that point in my life. And so I went in the Peace Corps, and I spent 2 years in Africa as a teacher. And the one defining outcome for me personally from that experience was learning the power of the community over that of the individual. And that one outcome really did carry with me into the work I do today. On the other end of my more traditional finance experience, I volunteered at the Public Theater, a wonderful institution in New York City. When I was there, it was actually struggling financially. I had amazing artistic plays and theater moving through, but really was challenged financially. And I really struggled personally with understanding how something so important in a community could be at the peril of not being there tomorrow or next week because it couldn't keep itself afloat. That really challenged me to think about the role of finance in really strengthening communities and the role of the community itself. And that led me to a wonderful organization, a nonprofit finance fund, a community development financial institution that potentially people know. And I was at that time working locally in Washington, D.C. as a community was rapidly growing and changing, and really working deeply in place in Columbia Heights for about 5 years, investing in the anchor institutions. Anchor institutions are generally those that really anchor a community, arts organizations, education organizations. In this case, that was charter schools and healthcare clinics. In about 5-6 years of doing that, luck brought me to Calvert Foundation, where I've been the last 9 years. That has only kind of deepened that work and expanded it into an international and global landscape. So a lot of different elements, but hard skills around finance, but I think it's really, too, the personal skills, understanding the role of the community, really questioning that role of the community, and thinking about how finance can be instrumental in supporting communities. Those experiences really brought me to this work today.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks who are most effective in this space, I feel like are recovering Wall Street employees, so I won't hold it against you.
That's good. And it's interesting because I've noticed a lot of us have brought the same type of drive we had when we worked on Wall Street to this work. And I think there's this myth that you come into this work and you kind of downshift in intensity potentially, or in innovation or creativity, however you want to benchmark it. But people bring that intensity into this work, and that's how so much, I think, is happening at such a rapid pace. within the impact investing space today.
Can you give folks who don't already know a brief overview about the Calvert Foundation, maybe some of the major initiatives you guys are working on?
Sure. So the Calvert Foundation has a 22-plus year history. So we've been around for quite some time. And what we've been doing over the course of those years has been raising capital from private investors, and we do that by selling a financial product. It's a fixed income note that investors can purchase, and they can purchase it in 1, 3, 5, 10, or 15-year terms. And with that purchase, they also earn a financial return between 1% and 4%. We take that money, and that's been about 18,000 investors since we began this, and about $1.5 billion over time. And we take that money and we lend it to intermediaries, to businesses around the globe that are doing both social good, but also generating a financial return. We get repaid by our borrowers, and we repay our investors. Over time, we've repaid our investors 100% of their interest and principal, and our portfolio quality is very, very high too. We have about a cumulative loan loss rate of less than 1% over this time. So that's kind of the core business we've been doing. With that, about 5-6 years ago, we also began targeting investor capital to certain initiatives or conversations to really deepen and broaden the opportunity for people to really engage in impact investing and really educate themselves. So, for example, one of the first initiatives that we launched that we still have today going strong was around women, and it was coined Win-Win, Women Investing in Women. And with that, we really brought the opportunity to target your note. You still buy the same note as you do when you buy the Calvert Community Investment Note, but you can target it to our investments that are really targeting impact in women and growth. And with that, we've now targeted about $40 million to that work. And also, we've added on other initiatives. So one of our most recent initiatives was around expanding who is an impact investor, and we began an initiative called Raíces, and that's evolved into a campaign called Parte de la Solución, and that's really to engage an audience that's broader in impact investing, so really targeting the Latino community both as investors but also with our investments. And we've been doing this now in partnership with Kiva as well as Latino Credit Community Union, bringing a joint message to an audience about the opportunity to invest for impact with their own capital.
I really love that example because I've seen in the impact investing space or even investing space generally, you may have an impact investment. So say you invest in a company that does a lot of good, but often the beneficiaries on the limited partner or investment side are existing wealthy Caucasian males or something. So I love the idea of spreading the actual base of investor much wider to the communities that can actually benefit from those impact investments.
Right, and I think that's being made possible because just in general, impact investing is not just for the ultra-rich anymore. More opportunities are emerging where retail investors, anyone, so to speak, your average investor, can put their money towards social and environmental good. You can purchase our note, for example, as low as $20. And there's other products that are emerging that have minimums of $500, $1,000. There's also some other impact products emerging that are more directed towards investment in the public market, but are bringing impact and the ability to direct your capital to that type of outcome to the retail or the everyday investor. So I think it's exciting because with that, now we're able to really crowd in and have a larger conversation.
I talked to Jenn for the listeners before the podcast and told her that I had recently moved my money off of Wall Street, which was in a socially responsible fund. But I realized that even a socially responsible fund, for example, this one, which I won't name, Wells Fargo was their top holding, even though it's a social. And I felt, how is this really, am I really creating impact by holding Wells Fargo and Apple and Google? Like, I like those companies, but selling more iPhones, and it just was sad that this impact on the public markets is often just like less bad than something like ExxonMobil. So I moved. This is a sort of a pitch for the community investment note because I really found that what Calvert has done is created something where you have almost a 100%, or it is a 100% payback to investors, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Over time. That's been our history. So
yeah, that's been history.
I must say, right, history is not indicator of future financial performance.
That's
but
right.
yeah, our track record has been very strong.
Yeah, and you can invest in local businesses doing amazing things, and there's a decent interest rate. So I found that it was the best possible place to put my retirement money. So I just wanted to thank you for creating that instrument.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's a statistic that I find interesting about our note holders in general. About half of them are coming from households with less than $100,000 annual income, and are coming from across the whole of the USA, California, Kentucky, Illinois, all the states. And so it's not, who's buying our note is not a few very high net worth donors or institutions. It's very democratized. And there's something about that I think is interesting in the sense of how easy and accessible it is for all of us to consider engaging as impact investors.
One of the things I love to ask people is, it could be related to your current work. It could be broader about the field or, personal even. But what are you most excited about right now? Is there a particular initiative or thing going on that you're most excited by?
Yeah, so there is. So there's, if I can give you two answers, there's work within Calvert Foundation I'm very excited about. Then I'm very excited about where the field is right now in one particular dimension, but I think it's going to be very telling about how we go from here into the next few years of this work either scaling or really multiplying rapidly, picking up velocity. It's been growing, but not, as we all know, at the pace it needs to grow, really, to meet some of the opportunities we see in communities and to really bring in a lot of capital that's wanting to invest with impact. So, and they're connected potentially, but internally, one of the things that we launched a new business line at Calvert Foundation late spring, early summer, very unsexy name, but it's called capital aggregation. But it says exactly what it is. And what it is the opportunity that we saw to begin to help the field rationalize and scale, and by doing that, in playing a specific role. And that is offering accredited investors the opportunity to make direct investments into funds, social businesses that we were aggregating capital for. And conversely, having the opportunity to help funds and social businesses capital raise, which can be some of the hardest and most time-consuming work. And so kind of playing that role of organizing and directing capital into transactions in hopefully a more efficient way, which cuts down the time from when the capital is needed to be raised and fully raised, and enabling businesses then to focus on what they do best, which is run their business. It was a pilot when we launched it, and we've seen great uptake in demand for us playing this role in the marketplace. And what we're going to begin doing is scaling that business in 2018. And what it's so challenging, though, I think is one of the norms within impact investing right now, which is moving away from enabling investors to customize their investments in impact, both the social return in particular, but also the financial return, and challenging investors to aggregate their capital with others. And so with that, finding benefit in the leverage and in the scale that them and other investors are providing by investing together with similar terms and similar social return. And what we're seeing is it's starting to create efficiencies in the field and lowering the economics of moving capital into communities. So I'm really excited about that, because I think if we can begin to give people more on-ramps to do these investments that are easy and accessible, the capital will come. And, these types of opportunities, if we can begin to demonstrate are easy and accessible, I think it will begin to spread and more capital will begin to follow into these investments. So that's one I'm really excited about. The other one that's more about the field is I think we're beginning to challenge definitions, and not in what is the definition of impact investing, but starting to divide into ecosystems around what that word means to us. So, for example, impact investing is a very generic term now and can span, as you said at the top of our conversation, anything from a public investment that's potentially socially responsibly screened to the type of investments that Calvert Foundation does in private debt transactions with high social impact, meaning that it's measurable in potential social return. We have very different definitions of impact. And I think we're going beyond saying one is bad and one is good, but we're starting to understand that there's nuance in that term impact investing. And with that nuance, investors, practitioners, and others are beginning to sort themselves into the kind of family or the cohort that they identify with in how they define, in this example, the term impact investing. And I think that's happening across the field with terms like market rate returns. People are putting that conversation in context and really understanding it just depends where you sit, if it's a below or above market rate return. And it's really not a binary conversation. It's really a nuanced one about where you sit in that market. I would say the same conversation is starting to unfold around scale. Scale, it all depends on how you define it, and people are starting to put themselves with the company that defines these terms in the way that they define them. And that's starting to rationalize and scale or move the market forward, I should say, because it's cutting down on confusion and miscommunication. And I think that's really exciting.
I love this conversation around language because one of the biggest challenges in this space is a question I'll pose to you. And I think there's different answers and there's no one right answer. But how do you measure impact with your investments? Do you use a assessment tool like, say, the B Corp assessment for your companies, or what's some of the things you use when looking at measuring impact?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we look at impact in three ways. We look at impact of who's buying our note, who our investors are, and I gave you one statistic earlier, the average annual income of half our investors is below $100K. So we can get a sense of who's buying our note, where they're coming from geographically, and what they're interested in it. We take investor surveys. This is more qualitative data about what they're interested in, whether it's the environment or gender lens opportunities, and just get a feel about where the market is, and therefore what type of impact we're having in potentially growing, educating the investor base. One question we ask in the surveys is what other impact investments do you have? And, you can see over time, our investors are starting to expand their portfolio of impact investments, which is great. Often we've thought of ourselves as an entry investment for a lot of individuals when they're first starting out this journey of questioning how their money can align with their values, how they can really invest their capital intentionally. Oftentimes people find our note as a good entry point because it has a low minimum, because it is a debt product, because it is a retail investment opportunity, and we have a long track record of doing this. So that's one piece of impact that we measure both qualitatively, quantitatively, and write on and try to contribute to grow the field. Another piece of impact is we lend mostly about a majority of our portfolio to intermediaries that then on lend to organizations that invest in businesses in place. So there's us, then we lend, say, to a microfinance institution or a community development financial institution or affordable housing developer. And then those institutions lend to a small business or to a project, et cetera, et cetera. So there's two layers of intermediation that occurs as our money travels from us into a community. And we, in fact, have begun to measure both those levels of intermediation to understand the impact of our capital. So one is at the typical place, which is from the intermediary into the community, understanding the outputs of that capital, the social outputs, whether that's new seats created in charter schools or new jobs retained or created. Some of the statistics that many of us see, we also collect, and we try to leverage all the institutional infrastructure that has been built. So GEARS, ARIS has some wonderful data that they collect on the community development financial space, et cetera, et cetera. And we often ask our borrowers to report financial and social data that they report to their other investors. So we don't want to create any extra burden on our borrowers as we ask for that data. At the other level of impact that we have, which is from us to the intermediary, we're becoming more engaged in measuring that impact. Because really the impact there is creating more efficient and effective capital flows into impact sectors or geographies. And if we can open up and de-risk, the perceived risk of some of these sectors is very high to the investor, but we know, having lent to them for some time, that it's not in reality a very risky investment. And if we can do that work of lowering the perceived risk, demonstrating that these types of investments are investable, that they can return a financial and a social return, then we can bring other capital along, and then there is more capital to fund impact sectors and geographies around the globe doing this work. And as I shared at the top of the call, but just to remind everyone, the type of investing we do is global. So we lend across 80 countries internationally and all throughout the U.S. We lend through 9 impact sectors, so very, very diverse, all the way from community development to renewable energy to sustainable agriculture and onwards. So we're able to really see these different sectors evolving and understand how we can help unlock more traditional capital or more impact capital to help them grow and scale quicker.
Let's talk about the sort of other side of the table, the entrepreneur side. You mentioned before we jumped on this call about there's some things you've been seeing with the savviness of entrepreneurs around fundraising. And I'm interested in some of the mistakes you see or possibly best practices you could offer to entrepreneurs wanting to raise capital in this way.
Yeah, it's been a real fun conversation that I've been having as I go out and just talk either in speaking opportunities or in communities to entrepreneurs that are really the heartbeat of a lot of this work and are building a business and then taking on the step of fundraising. And I would say quite often people will say the fundraising is the hardest part. It's really challenging. And one, just observation I've been making lately is that there's a sense that fundraising is really networking. And I do agree with that. You got to get out there and meet people. But I think that there's more opportunity for entrepreneurs to be savvy about how they prioritize their conversations by the characteristics and the intent of the different sources of capital. And then really understanding what type of capital your business needs, not just today, but 3 and 5 years down the road too, and aligning your conversations appropriately. So oftentimes I see, kind of just wholesale go out and talk to anyone you can get your hands on. But, there's different types of capital out there, whether it's philanthropic or impact capital that's more market driven. And they might be both using the same type of terms that we're impact investors. But if you can be a little savvier and think about to them what that term impact investing means, you can better understand if that capital is appropriate for you. So, for example, a high net worth investor that is doing impact investing out of their investment portfolio will rightly say they're an impact investor. And for you as an entrepreneur raising capital, identifying the characteristics of their capital as likely needing market rate return, likely having more stringent covenants, likely not being as risk tolerant, therefore, as other types of, quote, impact capital is important, because then you know if that meets the needs of your business. Likewise, a philanthropic entity can say we're an impact investor, and it could be that their capital, by nature of it being a program-related investment, for example, might be more market rate tolerant. It might be, in fact, even below, market rates, and therefore meet the financial model that you're building in your business in a more appropriate way. But again, both of them could call themselves impact investors. And I think as an entrepreneur, to do a little bit more homework and really think about the characteristics and the intent of that investor before prioritizing who you speak with would save a lot of time and I think increase entrepreneurs' hit rates in raising capital and getting the right type of capital in your business too.
This is so incredibly useful because I think it's the single biggest thing we've seen. I think I may have mentioned to you, but we have a fund, a small fund, $1 million fund called the Force for Good Fund, and we invest debt into women and people of color-owned businesses that are making an outsized impact on society and the environment. And we found that most of the entrepreneurs we've spoken to are really, they might say, I'm raising capital for my impact or my very very incredibly socially responsible business, and they might say, I have a meeting with Kleiner Perkins or something, and we just shake our heads and say, you don't really understand what's going on. My business partner had an interesting point for entrepreneurs is if you look at whose money they're investing with, it can tell you a lot of what their expectations for returns might be. I'm kind of curious if there are other indicators that you've seen or other guidance you could offer to entrepreneurs in this area.
I think you're right. That is one of the biggest signals, is just looking at where their capital is coming from, right? Is it coming, quote, from an investment portfolio, from an endowed foundation? That says a lot right there. What other kind of investments have they made? What is their theory of change even around using their investment capital? And is it aligned with what your theory of change is? It's all those signals that the investor puts out by doing what they do. However, when they say they're an impact investor, you can think a whole different thing. So I guess overall, it's very much researching and looking at what they do and drawing your own conclusions, not necessarily hearing what they say, because again, we're back to these words that everyone uses, like impact investing, like strategic investor, patient capital, high impact, that aren't really defined beyond the individual and how that person's defining it within the context of the work they do. So in some ways, kind of let go of all that jargon and just really do a quantitative analysis of the history. Ask what type of investments they've done. Where's your money coming from? Your investment portfolio or your foundation? And start to conclude yourself the characteristic of that capital and if it's appropriate for the business that you're building.
A few tangible resources for folks, and I'd love to hear if you have any other ones. Some that come to mind for me are the slow money folks, RSF Social Finance. There's another group called Regenerative Finance that's from the resource generation crowd. Those are three groups I can think of off the top of my head that are really interested in very patient and what I would consider highly impact, maybe even locally self-reliant capital. But are there other organizations or actual resources
that
you could direct
folks?
Yeah,
Investor Circle is one I think of too. That is a organization that attracts that type of investor and has resources to network with that type of capital. Yeah, I will keep thinking. That's one that comes straight to mind.
Sure. Yeah, and it's funny because it's not, there's not like 100, right? So for entrepreneurs out there who are thinking about raising capital and trying to find, it's not incredibly easy yet to find these folks. So don't beat yourself up too much. Moving towards some other questions here, there was a great article that you wrote in Green Money Journal about your path to impact investing. And the article was focused on women and impact investing. And I'm wondering, what's the best piece of leadership advice you've ever received? And just for entrepreneurs out there who might be interested in getting to where you are.
I've been very fortunate in having wonderful mentors either around me or I've joined organizations where they were leaders, and I've been able to learn by being near and around them and admiring and absorbing their leadership style. So I do think just very generally, you might not be an entrepreneur today. It might be a vision you're holding in the future. And so as you think about where you're working today, one of the greatest things is who you're working for. And it might be a large organization, by the way. It might not be that I'm talking about the CEO that's 4 levels above you. It might be your direct manager. But finding a manager, someone that you can work alongside of and for, that you really learn from and admire how they go about their work and how they make decisions potentially, how they engage with others, is an enormous, I think, building block for future leadership. I once had someone come to me, debating between 2 jobs, and I asked them, well, who would they be working for and what are they like? And they hadn't really thought about that piece. They had thought more about what the business did, what their role would be, all very important. But they hadn't really considered who they'd be working for and if they thought they can learn from that person's management style or just technical expertise. And I think there's something really important about considering that in roles that you either take on or even consider transitioning to. And so in my career, I've been very fortunate. I've had a handful of those types of individuals that have been just powerful leaders, and I've been fortunate to learn from. And, one of the ones that I work alongside of now, he said something very profound to me even recently that's made me really think. And he said, be conscious of the values and the culture you're setting for when you're gone. You're gone not from this world, but gone from this job. Because that's something I hadn't thought about deeply, is how to bake in a culture, and not forcefully, but authentically, so that that can be part of how decision-making and business carries on when I'm not here. And it was very intentional how he led the organization that he managed for years. And part of what he felt was really important in letting himself leave to let the next generation lead that organization. So I've been carrying that piece of advice with me lately as I think about decision-making in the present moment.
I love that example. What is the book you most often give as a gift?
Oh, that's a great question. So now, do people that do impact investing and wanting to do impact investing, or just in general?
Oh, you can take this question any way you like.
Any way I want. Oh, that's a great question. Because I do read an awful lot. And, I read a lot of different types of books, all the way from fiction to history. I travel quite a bit, and whenever I travel, I get books that are of that country or of a period of time within that country to really try and understand some of the culture and some of what has transpired that has created the reality that these people live in. So I do a lot of reading. And then I have two children. They're 11 and 9. So I've been through all the children's literature lately and have given a lot of baby gifts of books over time. It's usually the book I give. But I guess if I was to pick one, one of the pieces I give often is really literature, I guess. Walden was one I gave for a while to people, some of his writings and readings. He did a lot of time living by a lake and reflecting, and wrote, and within that writing kind of slowed down and really took notice of the small things in life. And we all live at such a fast pace that it's easy to move quickly and not notice the small things. And Walden did. And so I think it's quite profound, his writing, but also just the greater message that is shared through the writing and kind of the awareness it brings in reading and slowing down.
One more question in this vein is, what is your absolute most favorite thing to do in the world?
So my absolute most favorite thing to do in the world, 3 of them. One is to laugh. Laugh with my children, laugh with my colleagues. I just like to laugh and try to see the humor and the fun in life. So my best memories and what I like to do after a day at the office is to go home and be with my family. I live close to my parents and my sister as well, and our neighbors are very good friends, and just sit, talk, and enjoy. I like the feeling of running, of being free. And I ran a lot at one point and swam as well. I'm not quite as fast or as athletic as I once was, but I still enjoy the feeling. And the third is to travel and experience new things.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's funny. I feel like most people who have kids and travel, I feel like kids is always going to be a great top answer for this, for most favorite thing to do in the world. So I love that. In the last few minutes here, what do you need right now? How can the listeners help you in your work or help you grow this next economy?
So my hope is that we start demanding more. As conscious consumers in so many parts of our life, I think we've gotten lazy about how we invest our money. And by the way, I don't think people that manage money have made it easy with all the jargon and the paperwork and the regulation. It's become a challenging endeavor to invest your money. But I think as consumers, we should demand what we want. And it doesn't matter if you have $1 million or $20. You're consuming a product when you invest your money. You're not just hoping that you get a financial return. You're a consumer. And as consumers, I hope that we start to find our voice a little bit more strongly and demand investments that have the dimensions that we think are important for creating a good world, a good future, for all. And so how that looks is, I think, talking to your financial advisor and asking about impact investments, asking to be educated on this. They work for you. You pay them a fee. So I hope people find more gumption to kind of dig in and get into this stuff and not just educate yourself online, but get into financial advisors and really ask for them to provide you with product and provide you with opportunity and provide you with education. Because if they begin to feel that demand, that will start to tip how capital markets moves money. And that's when I think real big change could occur in how we allocate our capital as society and how we get the outcomes we see every day through corporations doing the work they do and creating products. So that would be my one huge hope, is that we begin to become more activist and more vocal in what we want to see.
And last question is, where can folks learn more about Calvert and also the Community Investment Note?
Sure. So we have a website. It's www.calvertfoundation.org. And on that website, there are drop-downs about becoming an investor, and that's where you'll find a lot of information about the Community Investment Note, including the prospectus. So we register a prospectus every year that one can print out and read, and then also some relevant information about how we run our business, who we invest in, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jen. It's been a pleasure. I'm a very satisfied customer of Calvert Foundation and just really inspired by your work.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to spend time with you and to know you're part of the community here as an investor at Calvert Foundation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. Lift is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. To listen to all our past episodes or to share your thoughts about the show with us, visit www.lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can also subscribe to this podcast through iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please take a moment to rate us on iTunes. It's really very helpful in allowing these ideas to reach a wider audience. Once again, thanks for listening.